The Falcon Lake Incident is regarded as one of, if not the most famous Canadian UFO incidents on record. This case was so prominent, the accounts were reported in newspapers at the time and have since repeated in books, magazines, and even on TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries. Stephen McCulloch was an industrial mechanic and an amateur geologist who liked to venture into the wilderness around Falcon Lake to prospect for quartz and silver. On May 20th, 1967, the 31-year-old Stephen was near a vein of quartz along the Precambrian Shield in the area when a nearby gaggle of geese erupted into a clattering of honks and startled the man. According to his account, Stephen looked up and saw two cigar-shaped objects with a reddish glow hovering about 45 meters away. One descended, according to Stephen's account, landing on a flat section of rock and taking on more of a disc shape. The other remained in the air for a few minutes before flying off. Although startled, believing that he was witnessing a secret U.S. military experimental craft, Stephen had the presence of mind to sketch what he was seeing. After about half an hour, he decided to approach the craft, later recalling the warm air as well as the whirring sound of motors and hissing of air. He also noted a door open on the side with bright lights inside and said he heard voices muffled by the sounds of the craft. He said he called out, offering mechanical help to the Yankee boys if they needed it. The voices went quiet, but did not answer, so Stephen tried in his native Polish, then in Russian, and finally in German. Only the whir and hiss of the craft responded. He claims he went closer and noted the smooth metal of the ship, with no seams. He then looked into the bright doorway, pulling on the welding goggles he used to protect his eyes while chipping at rocks during prospecting. Inside, Stephen said he saw light beams and panels of various colored flashing lights, but could see no one or any living thing. When he stepped away, 3 panels slid across the door opening and sealed it. He reached to touch the craft, which he said melted the fingertips of the glove he was wearing. The craft then began to turn counterclockwise, and Stephen says he'd noticed a panel that contained a grid of holes. Shortly afterward, he was struck in the chest by a blast of air or gas that pushed him backwards and set his shirt and cap ablaze. He ripped away the burning garments as the craft lifted off and flew away. Disoriented and nauseous, Stephen stumbled through the forest and threw up. He eventually made his way back to his motel room in Falcon Lake, then caught a bus back to Winnipeg. He was treated at the hospital for burns to his chest and stomach that later turned into raised sores on a grid-like pattern, and for weeks afterward, he suffered from diarrhea, headaches, blackouts, and weight loss. A grid of dots can also be seen on Stephen's burnt shirt. Stephen McCulloch, author of the book When They Appeared, still remembers his dad coming home sick and injured after an incident in the Falcon Lake woods. I recalled seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked pale, haggard, said McCulloch, who was only allowed to see his dad for a couple of minutes on the day after the incident. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulfur and burnt motor. It was all around and it was coming out of his pores. It was bad. The story about his dad being burned by a UFO ran in the Winnipeg Tribune newspaper, and that's when everything pretty much hit the fan, stated McCulloch. Following the incident, once the story had gone public, McCulloch's family received a lot of attention, not only from the general public, but also from RCMP, the Air Force, the media, and various government agencies. It is reported that this is the "they" McCulloch refers to in the title of his book, When They Appeared. McCulloch discussed a seemingly endless flurry of visitors and phone calls, as well as members of the media and people camping out in the lawn, and even people who followed McCulloch to school one day, peppering him with questions. The attention was so extreme McCulloch states that it took several years before it finally died down. What makes this case so compelling is the fact that after so much attention and investigation by a number of levels of government, and the official conclusion, even from the United States Air Force, was that this case was unexplained. Items were later retrieved from the encounter site, including Stephen's glove, shirt, and some tools. These were subjected to extensive analysis at the RCMP crime lab. No one could determine what caused the burns. At the landing site, there was a circle about 15 feet in diameter, devoid of the moss and vegetation growing in the other areas of the same rock outcropping. Soil samples, along with the samples of the clothing, were tested and deemed to be highly radioactive. So were the pieces of metal that were chipped out of the cracks in the rock about a year after the incident. The metal had somehow become melted into the cracks. If Dad hoaxed this, remember, we're talking about a blue-collar, industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed it, then he was a freaking genius. Many of the items have long since been lost, as they were transferred through various authorities and agencies. However, Rutkowski and McCulloch still have one of the pieces of metal which remains radioactive. Still sick in 1968, with recurrences of the burns showing up on his chest and suffering from blackouts, Stephen went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Doctors did a thorough investigation and even sent him to a psychiatrist. This psychiatrist came back with a report on McCulloch that read in summary, "This is a fellow who is very pragmatic, very down to earth, pardon the pun, and does not make up stories."